Welcome back to the Care Collective podcast. I'm your host, Michaela, and we are here to talk about everything as it relates to caregiving, whether that is, the new experiences as you're thrown into it after an emergency or a diagnosis, down to figuring out life after caregiving and who you are, what you're going to do with your life now that you've been through this experience. We want to be there every step of the way to talk about the emotions of it all, to talk about the feelings that people don't talk about, to bring on guests that can share expertise and stories and personal experiences about how to navigate caregiving, because this is probably your first time doing it and you just get thrown into it and you have to figure everything out. So we want to talk about it. And today, I have been taking a pause for a little bit, and part of that was just purely, needing to figure out the direction of the podcast, things that are going on. I'm super excited to announce some of the upcoming projects that we have that are in the works right now. But part of it, I think, was also personally, I just kind of needed some space and some time with some things that I've been going through that I'll get into in this episode, just because life gets heavy and hard and so many feelings that get thrown in your corner all the time. So know that I am in this with you truly, and I'm constantly working on trying to figure out, what's best for my brain, what's best for my heart as I go through life. And so I just want you to know you're not alone. All of us are feeling all the things, and I wanted to talk about that today. And in particular, I have found that one of the topics that people have really wanted to talk about the most, especially as it pertains to caregiving, is grief and the concept of grieving somebody who is still here and who is still alive. And I found myself recently being stuck in that grief cycle and feeling just the heaviness and the weight of it. Because I think that there are some people that we lose twice in our lives, or three times, or four times, or, however many times that disappointment sets in. And in your case, it's dementia begins to steal pieces of who they were, and you feel that heaviness and that weight of not knowing who they were as, a child, as a teenager. And we talked about in an episode ago how some people will be appalled at the racist or sexist or homophobic things that somebody might say, and they didn't think that that person was like that, because they didn't realize the changes that they have gone through. Maybe you're feeling that kind of grief and that kind of state of realizing who somebody was. Maybe it's when addiction changes a relationship, you're supporting somebody through something difficult in their lives, right? Where you don't feel like you're a choice that they can even make anymore, right? Maybe it's just after years of conflict, or the moment that you realize the relationship you've been hoping for just isn't the relationship that we have, and it's never going to be like that anymore. I've come to realize that, especially as I think about relationships that I had with people as a child, and then how they change over time and they're just not going to be the same anymore because of life and how things happen, right? We're not kids anymore. We can't keep the rose colored glasses on and hope everything will be okay. And then that second loss may come later when you actually lose them, or maybe it won't. Maybe you just lose touch with them, and so you never really get to grieve in a way. But I think that first loss is the one that nobody talks about. We drop off casseroles after seeing somebody at a funeral, but nobody's here to talk about these other feelings that you have all the time. Because it's hard to explain that grief when the person is still here. Like, how am I supposed to walk around and say, I'm just feeling really sad all the time because I don't talk to this estranged family member anymore. So I hope that you don't feel awkward with me talking about this. Like, we don't walk around and say that. But if somebody needed to take a day off from work because of a loss, if you said, hey, I'm traveling to my aunt's funeral, I need some time off from work, everybody would be so quick to jump in and understand and be there for that. And that's great. And I'm sure there's more support that people need in those cases as well, too. So, not trying to say that's easy by any means, but I think that this side of grief just goes so unnoticed and it's just not talked about, and it feels extremely isolating. It's hard to explain why you miss someone that you could just pick up the phone and call, because they don't realize that, no, I can't call them. We're not like that anymore, right? And I think a lot of caregivers know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you've ever found yourself grieving a relationship, a version of someone, or a future you thought you'd have with them, then today's conversation is for you. So for a long time, I thought grief had a very specific shape. I thought it arrived after a funeral, after a diagnosis, after a loss that everyone could see. But the older I get, the more I realize grief is a little bit sneakier than that. Sometimes it looks like anger, sometimes it looks like resentment, sometimes it can just look like exhaustion from pushing the wheel up the hill for so long. I think the biggest thing is that sometimes it disguises itself as guilt. And this is the trap that I caught myself in, because I was having the thought of maybe I should reach out. Like, And then the anxiety would creep in and be like, what if this person were to pass away a year from now and then I could never talk to them? And I regret that. And then I was in therapy, and my therapist was quick to say, okay, but what if you did say something and you started an argument and they still pass away a year from now and you still regret the things that you did say? So no matter what is going on, you're still going to feel that guilt. And she was like, I think that guilt that you're feeling is actually grief because you're mourning the relationship and feeling like you don't have the sense of, in my world, I think relationships are truly built off of the idea of a give and a take, lots of apologies, lots of moments where you had to overcome hard things. I love the videos of all of the old couples, and people will comment something about it saying, like, I wonder how many times they had to forgive each other. Like that to me is what relationships are. It's not going to be roses and daisies and all this happiness all the time. There's going to be really hard days, but it's going to take give and take from both sides. It takes acknowledging things that you have done wrong, taking ownership of that, and working to fix it, right? And so if that is not even possible with somebody anymore, that just creates like this weird tension because you want to resolve things and you want to fix things, but you can't, right? And whether that is because of a mental capacity that they just cannot understand that anymore, especially if you're dealing with somebody with memory loss, it's just a lot to carry. It's a lot to hold on your own, especially when you feel like you should be the bigger person and feel like, okay, but I'm okay. I should be able to fix this. I've fixed everything else in my life. I think if you're a caregiver, you probably identify as a fixer in a lot of ways, right? I think you're grieving the fact that things are not what you want them to be and that you cannot control everything in your life. And that is a very different thing than actual guilt because you have done something wrong. You know what I mean? And so I think, again, one of the most painful realizations that I have made in adulthood is that some people never become who we need them to be. They're not a bad person, they're not purposely trying to do harm to me, but they are human and they're complicated and they grew up in a different environment than I did, or, have different perspectives. And so sometimes we spend years hoping for a different conversation, for an apology, for things to just change and to have a relationship with this person. And we keep believing that if we can say the right thing, explain ourselves better, wait long enough, try hard enough, maybe things will finally change. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Because sometimes the hardest thing we actually have to do is to let go of that relationship we imagined and accept the relationship that actually exists. And sometimes that could mean setting boundaries. Sometimes that means setting a hard boundary and going no contact with somebody, right? If that is a possibility in your case. Sometimes it means, okay, we're not going to even talk about this topic because both of us are upset and both of us cannot reach a middle ground on this. So, as much as it bothers me, I'm just going to let it slide and not talk about it anymore, right? Like, that's the reality of what a lot of relationships have to turn into, especially if you need to get into a mode where you need to protect yourself for self preservation, for your own sanity. You should never feel bad for having to advocate for yourself and stand up for what's going to bring you the most peace, even if it goes against what you feel is exactly right or wrong in any scenario or what you want, right? Sometimes you just have to shove that to the side. And again, I think that adds to that complex feeling of grief that's going on because you're grieving that future, you're grieving that relationship, all the things that are going on in your life, right? And I think caregivers are uniquely familiar with this kind of loss. When someone develops dementia, people will constantly say they're still here, but they're not the same. I just watched the Notebook musical. I love the Notebook movie, but I feel like I love the musical even more, especially through this lens of caregiving, because they focused so much more on the dementia aspect of what was going on and were very clear in telling people and sharing the story of this person is still inside. But it was really hard for him to watch. If you don't know the story, it kind of explains how the wife has dementia and the husband is in a nursing home with her despite not needing to be in a nursing home, hoping to read this story to her to help her remember who she was. And so you get to see Noah, the husband's experience of just feeling so much pain in this person that he loves, not knowing who he is anymore, and trying to do everything that he can to be able to save her. You see Allie, the wife's frustration in not being able to remember what she's even forgetting and knowing that she's not remembering something and just feeling that frustration, right? And so, that feeling of just they're still here, but they're not the same is so frustrating, and sometimes it's hard to even put it into words. And you're grieving while you're still loving this person, you're mourning while still having to show up for all these appointments and taking care of somebody, and maybe you're having to set boundaries, even if it's just of yourself, of things that you're not going to bring up. I watched in this video where her son was trying to tell her, like, I'm your son, I know who you are my mother. And he got frustrated, and before he could even say anything, he just left the room because he realized, it's going to make her more upset if I even try to broach this topic or to say anything to her because she doesn't remember me. And the pain that came from that, right? And feeling like this person doesn't know who you are, and realizing it's going to be better for them for you to just walk away, even though that's not what you want to do in that moment, right? So maybe this person no longer remembers your birthday, or they can't tell you the same stories, they don't recognize you. Maybe it's a parent or grandparent that once took care of you, and now you're the one on the flip side trying to take care of them. And when the relationship changes, that grief follows. Caregiving isn't even the only place that this happens. It can happen in families, friendships, marriages, parent-child relationships, on both sides of that spectrum, and any relationship where the reality and what you want are just drifting further and further apart. And so recently, as I was kind of working through these feelings and these emotions, I just decided to write a letter to this person because I felt like I couldn't say all the things that I wanted to say because it would not be productive. And it was a very angry letter. I was definitely in the anger part of the grief cycle. And it was just left by the end of it, still feeling all the emotions every time I would read the letter again when I needed to kind of process everything. I could just feel that anger so strong again. And I think I needed to feel those emotions in some ways. And then a few weeks later, I decided to revisit it, completely write a new letter. And this time it was filled more with the grief and with the sadness of what I was carrying, of the things that I wish I could say to this person, and maybe a little bit of a different mindset. Because I have found that when you cannot say things to people and you feel like it's all festering inside of you, the only thing I know to do in these moments is to write it out in a letter and probably never give it to them. I think there's different things you can do with it. My therapist also suggested this to me after I did this myself, and said that sometimes she finds that people will mail the letter to themselves, and then while it's gone, they'll think about what they want to do with it. Sometimes you can send it to the person if you want to. I've seen people write notes on plates before and go and smash it. I think there's so many different things that you could do, whether it's even just like throwing it in a fire and burning the letter, right? Because I think we reach so many points in life where we need some kind of outlet and we need to get these words out, even if it's not going to go to that person and it's never going to change anything. There's just something about finally sitting down, thinking through your feelings, that I feel like at least helps me process things when I'm not in a space to talk about it. Because I've even had like friends or family members kind of ask how I was feeling, how I was doing, and I just felt like I couldn't even put it into words. And it was really difficult and hard. But being able to, again, write out those feelings and give myself space and time to process it, it helped so much. And I feel like it cleared up a lot of things for me and helped me think in the process of what I want to do with this relationship and how I'm going to move forward from that. And, I think regardless of what you were feeling or experiencing, you might be worried or thinking, what if I always feel guilty? I know I feel that. As I shared about this person where I don't know if I do want to reach out, if I don't want to reach out, and the guilt that I can feel, part of me worries that I'm just always going to feel guilty, and that whenever this person is gone, it's just going to multiply by 50, And I think we tell ourselves sometimes that, if I just do this one thing, I can get rid of the guilt. I just need to push through it or whatever, right? But I think that the guilt that you can feel in these cases is just a sign, again, it's the same as grief, that you really care and that you really, have an unresolved thing that you need to take care of for yourself. It's natural and it's normal to want closure, to want someone to tell you the right thing to do. But I think a lot of relationships ultimately can't do that. And so I think the only closure you can find is knowing that you can take care of yourself and you can do what's best for you, and that you can seek to find other closure in other ways. I think that part of it just also comes with time. And I honestly wish I had a perfect answer for you on how to fix grief or, the guilt that you can carry. But I don't think that there's anything we can really do to automatically wave a magic wand and fix it, right? But I do think there's a few things that can help. And the first thing is just naming the grief. I think I was stumbling around for a while trying to figure out what is this that I'm feeling? I feel so many things. And finally being able to acknowledge that it was grief and working through that, I feel so much better even just being able to tell somebody that, right? Don't just label it as stress or frustration or or if that is what you're feeling, name that too and try to work through it, because I think the way that you handle anger is different from the way that you handle guilt, right? So I think it's really important that you sit down and feel what you're really feeling. And the second is to know that you can have multiple things be true at once. I work with some other therapists in my life as well too, just professionally, and something that I love that a lot of them say is to stop saying but and to say and. So I can be sad that they're not in my life and I can be grateful that they're not in my life too. We don't have to feel guilty for creating all these different mixed emotions, because that's just the reality of how life is, right? Or at the same time, you can care about someone and want them to be in your life and still acknowledge that the relationship is unhealthy and that something needs to be done about it, even if that's you stepping away from it, right? Life is not an either or, it's usually both, or an and is included in that, right? And the third thing I want you to know too is that it's okay to let yourself mourn, to think about the memories you have with that person, why they were special to you at one point in time. I think it just shows you how much you were capable of loving and of being loved at that point in your life. So don't feel like you need to fix the grief or solve it or push it away in a little box, because that's just the thing that will make it feel worse over time. So allow yourself that time and that space to mourn. So I want you to just acknowledge, even for yourself, and know that not every grief experience is going to begin with a funeral or with a phone call telling you somebody's passed away. Sometimes it can begin with a conversation that doesn't go right, or a diagnosis, or setting a boundary and realizing that things won't be the same. Sometimes grief arrives long before death ever does. And if that's where you find yourself today, I hope that you know that you are not alone, and that I know that your grief is real because I have felt it myself. And that grieving someone who is still alive doesn't mean that you don't care about them anymore. Sometimes it's the opposite. It means that you love them so much and you don't know what to do with all of that, right? If they're not being receptive of it. So thank you for being here and for taking care of yourself and for listening to this podcast today and allowing yourself to grieve and to even just explore the idea of feeling grief. I know that might be hard for some people to say right now that they're feeling grief. So until the next episode, please take care of yourself as much as you're taking care of everyone else. And we'll see you next time.